from today. Obviously, those of you that are in the Friday section have another couple days. And then today, the Wednesday lab folks have the calorimetry lab, which the Friday lab students already did a couple weeks ago. Obviously, there's no lab on Friday because of the Veterans Day holiday. So that means that we're going to have to finish up your exam material today, and if all goes well, we should have no issues doing that. So the main topic today is refrigerators, and with that and a little bit of cleanup, we should be able to have you drawing the cutoff for homework 8 and exam 2 material at the end of this lecture, if not before. Okay. So that's what we have coming up with the schedule. Any questions before I get started? Okay, so let me just review here laws of thermodynamics. The first law is an energy conservation law, which talks about internal energy, heat, and work. And so there's 2 different ways to manipulate the internal energy of the gas. One is by heat, one's by work. And specifically for these closed cycles where we close a loop, and for the purposes of doing it again and again, delta E will be 0. We choose to split the heat up into 2 pieces, QH and QL, but we leave all of the work combined as net work. So it's useful to parse it out that way so we can think about what's happening. So then we get to the second law, okay? So I keep on, I refer to this as the engine statement of the second law because there will be also another way to phrase it called the refrigerator statement. So this is one way to say what the second law of thermodynamics is. It says that your efficiency has to be less than 1, okay? So remember what efficiency is? It is a positive rating for how to evaluate the engine. It runs theoretically between 0 and 1, or 0 and 100%. And it's defined as the net work divided by QH. So whenever we want to rate these systems, it's always what we want divided by what we pay for it. And so the net work is what we get. So basically the way to think of the operation again is to think of it as temperature high and temperature low. Those are the temperature extremes of the system, and we're harnessing the fact that heat tends to flow from hot to cold, and we're diverting a part of the energy of that flow out as useful mechanical work, okay? And so we take what we want, which is the net work, and divide it by the inflow of heat, and of course that right there means that even at most you could only get 100% of the work that you get out from the heat that you put in. But in reality, it has to be less than 1 because there always has to be some heat that just continues on, and that's not useful. This, again, we call this the exhaust, okay? So there will be some heat flow that just continues on and goes out of the gas as well. So there's a couple different ways. The efficiency, the kind of easiest way to think of it in terms of what you want divided by what you pay for it. And then there's also this other form, which is also very useful because it just uses the heats, the 2 heats. Okay. So basically, the second law says that the efficiency has to be less than 1. You have to always have exhaust, and specifically, a stronger form of the second law is not only does the efficiency have to be less than 1, it has to be less than a Carnot engine running between the same 2 temperature extremes. So basically the Carnot engine is the best you can do. So in any given circumstance with a given T high and a T low, the Carnot efficiency is going to be the best, and any other efficiency at best can meet that if you're using a Carnot cycle, or it's even worse if you're doing something else. Now, why wouldn't you want to employ the Carnot cycle in everything then if it's the most efficient? I mentioned that at the end of last time. It's highly efficient, but because there's 2 isothermal processes in it, it's very slow. So it's high efficiency, but very low power. Okay? So oftentimes, we're willing to live with a lower efficiency for the sake of a higher powered engine. Now, if you look at the Carnot efficiency and some of the other engine efficiencies as well, they seem to indicate you can get up to 1 efficiency if your low temperature reservoir is not just any old temperature, but 0 Kelvin. So you notice you can plug in a 0 and you get 100% efficiency. Well, the third law closes that loophole. It says you can't get to 0 Kelvin. So basically, the loophole that seems to be there in the second law is closed by the third law. So in summary, what does the law of thermodynamics say about the operation of engines? First law, there's nothing wrong with there being 100% efficiency. It just says you can't have, of course, 101% efficiency. You can't get more energy out than you put in. Okay? So the first law says you can get 100% efficiency, you can break even. Second law says you can't break even. You can only lose. And then the second law says you can only lose, the efficiency has to be less than 1, unless there's this loophole, and then the third law closes that loophole. Okay? Now, why can't the low temperature reservoir be 0 Kelvin? Well, we'll see that arise naturally from our discussion from today when we talk about refrigerators. So for a fridge, essentially it's just an engine run backwards. And now obviously I don't mean if you put your car in reverse, that's like putting on the air conditioning. What I mean is that the thermodynamic cycle is in reverse, okay? So here's what happens with a fridge. I'm going to specifically look at an auto fridge. So this is the same cycle that we use for the car engine, but we're going to run the cycle backwards. So let's go ahead and draw our PV diagram. And now instead of the whole cycle running clockwise, we're just going to run it counterclockwise. So let me draw my cycle. I'll add the arrowheads to it second so I don't get mixed up. So there it is. It's my auto cycle. It's ping-ponging back and forth between 2 different volumes, which I can call V and RV. But there are 4 distinct temperatures. There's my T high, which is my highest temperature, and my T low, which is my lowest temperature. And now, when I add my arrowheads, I'm going to draw all the arrowheads so that now the cycle is proceeding counterclockwise. So it looks like this. Okay. So if you look here, you notice that there is more negative work down now than positive work. So the net work is negative now. I can actually represent this also with one of these diagrams that I was talking about here. We're operating between 2 temperature reservoirs. And I just reversed the direction of the arrows. Like so. So notice it's exactly the same as the engine. I've just reversed all the arrows. This is now my fridge. That's a working medium on my fridge. Here's my highest temperature reservoir and my lowest temperature reservoir. I'll keep the labeling of the arrows the same. I'll call this QH. I'll call this work net. And I'll call this QL. The only difference is that now I've reversed the whole cycle. I have to reverse the signs as well. So the net work used to be positive, which is work is coming out of the engine. Now you have to put it into the fridge. That's going to be negative. And I'm still going to call it QH because QH is what flows, is when you're trading temperature with the higher temperature thing, or trading energy with the higher temperature thing, but now QH is actually going to be negative because it's flowing out, and QL is going to be positive because it's flowing in. those signs have reversed now. So what do we have? We have something that's very seemingly strange. We have heat flowing from low temperature to high temperature, which seems to be completely opposite of all that we've learned about heat since the beginning of the thermo unit. We learned that heat flows from higher temperature to lower temperature. Now we have it flowing from lower temperature to higher temperature. That is possible, but you need an assist. You need network to make that happen. This could not happen. Heat cannot flow from lower to higher temperature without the assistance of network. It doesn't spontaneously happen. We know that's with heat. It always, if you give it its own option, it'll flow from higher to lower temperature, not the opposite, right? So that's the whole purpose of a fridge, right? Is to keep things cold, right? Make them even colder, even though it's in a hot room. So that's why you have to plug your refrigerator in. It's not going to spontaneously do that. If you unplug your refrigerator, of course, your hot room is going to have heat flow in to the cold compartment, and your milk and eggs are going to go bad, right? So that's why you need to plug it in. That's why you need to apply some network, and then you can make this happen. So let me show you how this is practically realized in a system. Let's draw a refrigerator. So here's your refrigerator compartment, and here is the room that it's sitting in. Okay? So how does it work? Well, you have an enclosed system of some material. It actually oftentimes experiences a phase change, but we'll simplify the situation. So we're just going to have it be gas. So let's have it go like this. So it's a closed loop system. Let's say we have a closed loop. I guess let me try to draw it with some thickness so it can be kind of like a tube. So this thing actually cycles. It circulates. Sometimes it's inside the fridge, and sometimes it's outside the fridge. It's kind of going around like this. So let's do the play-by-play. If I go back over to my PV diagram, it turns out that the middle two temperatures are the fridge temperature and the room temperature. So it's actually the gas that has the most extreme temperature changes. At times, the gas in the closed loop system is higher temperature than the room, and at times it's lower temperature than the fridge. Okay? So the extremes are not the room or the fridge. Notice that the temperature of the fridge is below the room temperature, right? Okay, so that's how we want it, right? We want the refrigerator compartment to be cooled. Yes? Okay, so let's take a look at how it works. Well, when the gas is finished circulating through the fridge, it comes out at T-fridge. So it emerges out at T-fridge, and then what we do is we put work in. So we have what's called a compressor, and it compresses the gas, and there's work that goes in. In fact, in this auto fridge, we're adiabatically compressing it. Okay? And what happens? The temperature goes from, where is it here? Oh, sorry. By the time it emerges out of here, it's basically the temperature of the room again. Let me make sure that I get this right. So I'm drawing it on the back end after it's already basically come out into the room. So I put work in, okay? Did I have it right? well, let's just keep going. I'll correct it afterwards if it's not. So you put work in, and you adiabatically compress the gas, and you do it so violently, like that bike pump example that we have, right, where you just really compress it down very hard, and you make the temperature go way up, okay? So this goes to TH. Okay? And that makes the temperature go up so much that it'll actually radiate heat to the room. So it'll export out of the gas and into the room, so that's QH. If you actually touch the back of a refrigerator, it's warm. Okay? That's because it's radiating heat out to the room. If you get the bright idea to ever try to use your refrigerator as an air conditioning unit for your room, that's not going to work unless you put the back of it out the door, okay? Because it just takes heat from inside the refrigerator compartment and sends it outside, okay? Your room will get hotter if you run a refrigerator in it. Then you might need to turn on the air conditioning, which is essentially applying the same principle, except you're in the refrigerator compartment now, and the outside environment is now where the heat's getting dumped. Okay? So what happens here is you're dumping heat to the environment, and then you return to T room. Oh yeah, I was right the first time. This is T fridge. It just emerged out of the fridge compartment. Let me label these points because I'm getting mixed up. Let me label them. I started here at point A. Wait a minute. What's that? Did someone say that?
No, I thought you wouldn't start with the high temperature, right?
So the let's see. I started from
the room.
Let's go from TH down to T room. So I'll call this A and B. So this is, I've cooled. Oh, I know what I did. My whole diagram is messed up. That's what. I should have drawn it. Oh, damn it. It's like this. That's the problem. It looks like this. Sorry about that. I knew there was something going wrong. So I had the arrival at the two isotherms in the middle messed up. So, okay, now I think it's correct now. I started off A to B. I cool from T hot down to T room. Okay. Okay. So that's A to B. And then, once you've done that, this is called the compressor. This, by the way, is the thing that you are hearing when your refrigerator hums, is you're hearing the compressor going. And then here you have what's called an expansion valve. And this is when work goes out of the gas. And it makes its temperature plummet precipitously. In fact, it goes all the way down to T low. So now we go down to T low. T low. So I guess I'll call that point C. So here we are, point C. Okay, this is better now. Okay. So notice that, if you popped out the compartment, you obviously can't see this, but if you popped out some of the plastic paneling behind your milk and eggs, you would see that there is some tubing there, and it's extremely cold. It's much, much colder than the temperature inside your fridge. And the reason why is because if this is the room, which is at T room, this is your fridge, which is at T fridge. And because you've dropped the temperature down so low of the gas you will actually have heat that flows from the refrigerator compartment into the gas, okay? And it'll eventually climb up to T fridge, and now we've closed the loop, okay? So now we're at D. So now I've taken the refrigerant, the gas in the closed system, and I've raised its temperature from T low to T fridge. But notice that I have accomplished evacuating some heat out of the fridge. So what's happened is that this temperature can drop because some heat went out of this into this, where it can get now carried away. So instead of just letting them equalize, right, instead of just letting the gas in the refrigerator compartment equalize, you take this away. And then again, as we go, let's do it one more time. Once the gas emerges, you compress it until its temperature is very high. You let it dump some heat out into the room. It gets back down to room temperature. You use the expansion valve to drop the temperature really low to T low, and then you can evacuate some heat out of the refrigerator again. Okay, that's how it works. The refrigerant itself in the closed loop system, it spends time at temperatures higher than the room and lower than the refrigerator compartment. Does that make sense? So that's how it works. And it turns out, when you compare the work that you have to put in and the work you have to take out, it ends up being, of course, that you have to put more in than you get out. Okay? So you have to end up putting in more work in the compressor than comes out in the expansion valve. Okay? So there does need to be a net work input in order to get this gas to keep on circulating in such a way as to evacuate heat from the colder space and go dump it to the hotter space. So the net effect is that heat is coming out of the refrigerator and going into the room. But you could never have that happen without plugging the refrigerator in and running the compressor. So you may notice that your refrigerator hums. That's when the compressor is on. And when it's not humming, that's because basically it's a pretty well insulated system. And so it doesn't need to be on all the time. It can reasonably maintain the temperature for a little while, even when the compressor is not running, right? The whole thermal insulation of it is that the heat flow to the environment is normally pretty slow. Nonetheless, if you have a power outage for 24 hours, of course, the heat's going to get in there, but the compressor doesn't need to run all the time. It just runs in bursts. You can try it yourself, leave the refrigerator door open for a minute, and the compressor will definitely kick in. Okay. Are there any questions on that? Okay, so sorry I missed the PV diagram a little bit. I had the two isochoric processes in here going too far. They just go to the next adjacent isotherm. So from T low to T fridge and from T high to T room. Okay? So now all we have to do is just figure out a way to rate the performance of it. So efficiency is not what we use because the purpose of a refrigerator is very different. Okay? So our rating is always what we want over what we pay for it. Okay? So that's the more generic way to think of the rating. We want as much stuff as we can get in the numerator. So we want this to be large. We want what we pay for it to be as small as possible. And so then if the rating, whatever that is higher, then that means it's better at doing its thing, whatever it's supposed to be doing, right? So in this case, what we don't want net work out. That was the whole purpose of an engine, right? Is to provide mechanical work, makes your car go. Here, the whole thing that we want is QL. We're looking to evacuate heat out of the refrigerator compartment. So QL is what we want. And what we pay for it is actually having to put in mechanical work, right? It's not work out. We have to put this in. We pay for it. So we might do it like this. So this would be the way that we'd rate how good is a refrigerator. This is called the coefficient of performance. We don't call it efficiency. It's coefficient of performance for a refrigerator. And the only other modification that I'd like to make is that coefficient of performance, just like efficiency, we want it to be a positive number. It's nice when our ratings are positive numbers. That's not currently going to be the case because QL, while QL is now positive, our network is negative. And so that would annoyingly make this negative. And so instead, I'll give you two options. One is to put a negative itself in front of the network. That'll cancel the negative of the network itself. Or some people like to write it like this. It doesn't really matter. The point is that whenever you're giving yourself a rating, you always want to give yourself a positive rating. Okay? So, there is your rating for a refrigerator. Okay? So, if I want to add to my second law, I can add a law of how the second law informs a refrigerator. Well, a refrigerator, there is no such thing as a workless refrigerator. There is no way to get heat to flow from cold to hot without putting in work. Okay? So, a net work can't be 0. So, a 0 in the denominator would give us a coefficient of performance of what? If this was 0, we would get, what would K be? Infinity. So we have to have that K is less than infinity. That's a way to state the second law of thermodynamics in terms of a refrigerator, is that whenever you want heat to flow from cold to hot, you need to do network input, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so I should point out at this stage that the efficiency and coefficient of performance are cobbled together with different combinations of QH, QL, and W net. So this one is W net over QH, this is QL over negative W net. So we can actually make an equation that relates coefficient of performance to efficiency. Now, why is that interesting? Well, again, you can't literally run a particular device which is designed to be an engine backwards as a refrigerator, but we might still want to compare the thermodynamic cycles. Okay, so if we're looking at the PV diagram, we might be interested in knowing how, if we run it one way as an engine or the other way as a fridge, how are they going to compare? Okay, so let me show you the relationship. So the coefficient of performance is QL minus W net. And I can also note from this equation that I can sub in QL is equal to, let me make sure to get this right, W net minus QH. So let's put that in. So what do I get? I get -1 plus QH over W net. And this quantity right here is actually 1 over the efficiency. So here I have the relationship between coefficient of performance and efficiency. So if I run a cycle one way versus the other way, it tells me how do they compare. So with this, I want to discuss some systems as some particular PV cycles as both types, both working as fridges one way, working as engines the other way, and we can make some conclusions here, okay? So let me go ahead and do that. So let me draw a couple engines, and I'm going to have my efficiency increasing this way. So let me give you some drawings. So I have my TH and my TL. Let me do, I guess, 4 of these. They're all operating between the same TH and TL, so let me not bother to write that in. So I'm basically drawing myself. I'm not necessarily saying that there are other ones in between, but I just want to draw a sampling of 4 different engines. So I'm going to start with the efficiency being 0, being 1 at the very end, and then I will put the 2 most well-known engines in between, an Otto cycle and a Carnot cycle. All right. So I'm going to kind of do these kind of dealies where I draw all 3 arrows. I've sort of tried to draw these skinnier to indicate that they're smaller energies, and then the fat one is a bigger energy. But I'm not going to be able to depend now on my ability to draw these cartoon arrows of varying thicknesses so you understand. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a couple different arrows. So if I draw 3 of them, that means more energy QH than if I only draw 2. Is that all right? So I'm going to assume that my QH is going to be like that. And so basically I have like 3 arrows to work with for QH, and then I get to decide how do they get split up between the 2 outgoing ones. How do they get split up between the QL and W net? And the first one, I'm going to let them all go to QL. So my network is nothing. I don't get any useful mechanical work. That's why my efficiency is nothing. Here I have nothing remarkable. I have energy, heat flowing from high to low temperature. That happens spontaneously. Okay? So I have no net work. I just have spontaneous heat flow, heat from T high to T low. No big deal. Spontaneous natural process. This is not what you'd want to use for your engine, right? It would do you no good. You would get no mechanical work out. Okay, so let's do an Otto engine. So an Otto engine is obviously not the most efficient thing. It has a lot of power. But let's say out of the 3 arrows that come in, only 1 can be harvested for useful mechanical work. So efficiency is on the low side. So when we get to the Carnot cycle is the most efficient engine that you can have. So let's say, just for argument, that we can harvest 2 out of the 3 arrows into work. So as we go here, going from here to here, we're getting more net work and less waste, less exhaust. So that's useful, and that's exhaust. Now, we get to the final stage where if you could have a perfectly efficient engine, it would take 100% of that, turn into mechanical work, and there would be no exhaust. So this would be QL equals 0. It would be an exhaust-free engine, exhaust-free heat engine, which of course we know is impossible, right? Can't happen. There's nothing in the first law which says it's not okay, but the second law forbids it, right? We top out at the Carnot cycle, everything beyond that is impossible. So everything from here on up is impossible. So that's just a little bit of talking about the engine side of things. Now let's reverse all these cycles. Now, one of the things that this tells us is that the coefficient of performance and the efficiency are inversely related. So if the efficiency increases, the coefficient of performance goes down. Okay. So let's add a second line here, where now my coefficient of performance is going to increase going the other way. In essence, a good engine is a bad fridge and vice versa. The more efficient it is as an engine, the worse it's going to be as a refrigerator. So let's take all of these things again. I'll draw again duplicates. And the only thing I'll do differently is I'll reverse the direction of all the arrows. All I've done is take the one directly above it and reverse the arrows. Okay. So I'll give you a second to catch up there. Let's talk about this thing. This was the impossibly efficient engine. Now, there is absolutely no heat evacuated. There's no Q low at all. So what's my coefficient of performance on this thing? It's 0, okay? Because there is no QL, which is the very thing that you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to evacuate heat out of the lower temperature, and now you're not doing that. You can plug in here when E equals 1, K equals 0. Or you can just think of it as you don't have any QL. So the refrigerator is not doing its job. Now, since I'm going the other direction now, of course, when I went this way, I had more network. Now I have less network. But remember, that is the input now that you have to put in. So you have less input, and you have more QL, which is now not the exhaust, but is actually the useful thing. So as you progress downward, or I should say to the left on these, you'll find that you're putting in less work and getting more QL. So everything that was good for an engine is now bad for the fridge, okay? Here we wanted as much work output and as little exhaust as possible. Now we want the opposite. We want to put in as little work as possible and get as much QL evacuated, right? So this is getting better. And by the time we go over here, we have that the net work is 0. This would be a perfect refrigerator. This is where heat is spontaneously flowing from low to high with no necessary input. This would be a coefficient of performance of infinity. Because now heat is flowing from low temperature to high temperature without work input. You can see it again. If there's no net work, then the coefficient of performance blows up. Or you can just plug it in here when you have 0 efficiency. Well, that's infinite coefficient of performance. So what we see is that as a cycle gets better as an engine, it gets worse as a refrigerator. And likewise, as something gets better as a refrigerator, it gets worse as an engine. Okay? So there are kind of these competing factors for what's going on. One of the things, by the way, that we learned, to increase the efficiency, we want the difference between the high and low temperatures to be large. We found that that improved the efficiency. I showed you that with the Carnot equation, and I said it was a true thing for all engines. You want them to have a higher temperature difference. Why? Because if those higher and lower temperature isotherms are further apart, you can fit a bigger area between them. And that's good because that area is the net work, which is what you're going to get out of the system. Well, it's going to be the opposite here. We want the difference in temperatures to be smaller to make it a better fridge. In fact, let me show you. We calculated last time, and again I'm using the Carnot cycle as kind of my example. We calculated last time that the Carnot efficiency was that. So I'll go ahead and plug in here into this to get the Carnot coefficient of performance. So that's TL over TH minus TL. I won't bore you with the algebra. Okay? So again, I'm going to use the Carnot cycle as kind of my thing to motivate this, even though it's true for all refrigerators. And notice that if the difference in the temperatures in the denominator is small, that improves the coefficient of performance. So refrigerators work better when the difference of temperature extremes is smaller. And again, you can make sense of why that is. You want the isotherms to be closer together. The isothermic streams to be closer together because then you can fit a very little amount of work in between them. But that's good now because the work is not the output, it's the input you have to put in. So a refrigerator is always going to work better if the temperature inside is barely lower than the temperature outside. It's going to work harder if its coefficient of performance is going to go down if you're trying to maintain a vast temperature difference. Question?
So you know that makes it more efficient because your difference from the
More, to be careful about efficient. It's a higher coefficient of performance.
yeah. So since your difference between the like room and hot temperature being lower, that means it's slower and it's fast at cooling down the fridge.
Well, so you're talking about power, right?
Yeah.
So power also has to do with the frequency that you run the compressor, right? So you can calculate, just like we talked about last time, you can calculate the power input, right? So that's a different story, where the question then is how fast can you complete the thermodynamic cycle in time, right? So does that sort of answer your question? So one is a way of rating how good or bad is one cycle, and then the other one is how fast can you run it. Let me answer this after class because I have all of 5 minutes to finish exam 2 material, okay? So again, a refrigerator runs better if the temperature difference is smaller, okay? Which tells us something interesting. If we're trying to cool something down all the way to absolute zero, by definition, that something is going to be way lower temperature than whatever the environment is. So a refrigerator is going to have a hard time cooling something because down, because it performs much worse, okay? So as the temp T low decreases, the coefficient of performance decreases. And in fact, you can see from this equation that as you approach 0 Kelvin, your coefficient of performance goes to nothing. So it actually tells us why we can't get to absolute zero. Because how would you get to absolute zero? You would get it by cooling something with a refrigerator. Okay? So you can't cool something down to 0 Kelvin because the refrigerator you used to do it would become worse and worse and worse of a refrigerator as you drop the temperature. The analogy that I would make to you is this. Let's say someone asked you to dig a hole in the sand on the beach. You could probably dig a 1-foot hole or a 2-foot hole or a 5-foot hole. But let's say they asked you to dig that hole all the way to China, okay? Here's the problem. The deeper the hole gets, the more the sand collapses, the water goes in there, okay? It's harder and harder to dig a deeper hole. That's the problem with getting to absolute zero and why you can't actually get there. Because when you dig a hole that's as deep as that temperature-wise, the entirety of the rest of the universe is constantly trying to get heat in there. And no refrigerator can keep up with that, okay? Okay, so one more kind of unrelated or sort of related thing that I want to throw in there. I'll see what I can do in a couple minutes. I believe it is on the practice exam, so I do want to mention it. There is a tie-in to the speed of sound with thermo. Now we learned that the sound was a compression disturbance in air. As you can probably guess, since it's very rapid, we could model it as adiabatic, right? So the speed of sound is an adiabatic compression. So we know PV to the gamma is a constant. So let me just suppose that I take the derivative of this with respect to volume. We'll see what useful thing comes out. I do my, what does he call it, chain rule or something? The multiplication rule thingy? Is that what you call it? Product rule? Is that what? Product rule? So I take the derivative of P times this, and then the derivative of this times P, right? Okay, and the derivative of constant is 0. So if you do that, you'll get something that looks like this. Let me write it like this. So basically, you get something like this when you take that derivative and shuffle everything around. And this right here is very reminiscent of a formula that we talked about earlier in the semester for bulk modulus, which informed the speed of sound, right? Well, we've just figured out how to calculate the bulk modulus of a gas. Okay? It's gamma times P, the pressure of the gas. It's not really a constant, by the way. It is itself a variable, so the bulk modulus grows with pressure. Okay? The slope is gamma. Nonetheless, if you look at atmospheric pressure, which is 101 kilopascals, of course we learned that the sound waves, there's a few pascals of variation around it, not very much, right? So essentially, we can calculate the bulk modulus that would be relevant for us using atmospheric pressure. if you do that, you'll get 142 kilopascals. That is, by the way, on your equation sheet on the data page. You'll notice that marked at the very corner in the bulk modulus table. So if you put in the gamma for your gas, of course air is diatomic, okay? So air itself is diatomic. You put in F equals 5 because it's diatomic at a medium temperature range. And you can actually calculate, putting in the density, of course, and you can get our very familiar 343. Just make sure you use the density of air at room temperature. So now you can use the ideas from thermo to actually calculate the speed of sound yourself without having to be given the bulk modulus if the bulk modulus is a gas. Also, just as final thoughts, you can plug in P equals nRT over V. You can plug in density is mass times volume. And then, of course, you will find the ratio of these two, the mass per mole, which can be called the molar mass. You can also simplify this expression to gamma RT over M. So really, to predict the speed of sound in a gas, you need to know the gamma, you need to know the temperature of the gas, and you need to know the molar mass of the gas. Okay, so this just turns into this with these substitutions. Okay, go ahead and draw a line in your notes. That's the end of homework 8 and exam 2 material. We'll pick up some light stuff in lecture on Monday.